Hi, and welcome to the creation of diagrams with Urban CW Modeler. In today's session, we're going to look at the creation of new diagrams and what it means to have a diagram created with a certain rule and what different palettes look like, things like that. And we'll actually go ahead and create some diagrams in this session. To access the new diagram screen, click on File, New Diagram from within CW Modeler. You can also do that from Object Explorer, Model Explorer, but today we'll focus primarily on looking at it from CW Modeler. So when you launch this screen, you have a few things to look at here. First of all, you have an ability to choose whether or not your diagram templates are organized by diagram rule or not. So that's something you can do. If you choose to group things by diagram rule, you'll notice they're organized that way. So we have hierarchy, dynamics, generic, etc., as a way to organize them. And then on the right, you'll have a preview of what the palette looks like. So as you go through choosing different diagram templates, the palette will change. So that's something you should note. And once you find the right one, you can go ahead and give it a name. I also recommend giving it a title, as that will be used in your Evolve web platform later on. And then click on Create. So once you've filled that out, go ahead and click on Create to create the diagram. Now, diagram rules are something that determines a couple of different things about your diagram. So they predefine the consistency rules that will be available, as well as some physical limitations that exist as part of a diagram. For instance, if you are creating a dynamics diagram, it explicitly denotes the type of things that should be available and how they should be connected. So for instance, if you're using a dynamics diagram, you can't use a regular connector to connect a process to an application because that's against the rules of a process flow dynamics diagram. But you can use an association to connect an application to a process or even to an event, as you can see from this slide. Just to give you an overview of what all the diagram rules are, you can see here that we have the 6 different rules. So hierarchy is the rule that allows you to create top-down diagrams. It's generally used for a decomposition diagram, org charts, things like that. And you can also use either the hierarchy links or association connectors in a hierarchy diagram. Dynamics refers to traditional process flow diagrams, so diagrams that are used for simulation, for the ability to do some impact analysis through simulation, to be able to do resource utilization and cost analysis, and just in general, a traditional process flow. A generic diagram is a rule that's used for anything that doesn't apply to any of the other 4. So it's not hierarchy, dynamics, entity, or data flow. So it's a diagram that could be anything. You can use any objects you want, any connectors you want, and it will allow you to create that type of diagram. So often if you're creating your own diagram template with your own palette, you can use generic as the rule if it doesn't fit into any of the other 4. Entity is used for ERDs, or entity relationship diagrams. So a diagram that comes in from Urban Data Modeler can be recreated in Urban EA as an ERD. And then data flow is for the flow of data. It generally includes specific objects such as external entities, processes, data stores. And when you decompose, the parent process will be placed on the child diagram with all the inputs and outputs automatically recreated. The no rules has no diagramming behavior restricted, and usually I use one of the actual rules. I don't generally create diagrams without any rules. And then the matrix is used for the creation of matrices. With that in mind, we're going to create an organization chart diagram. And the way we go about doing that is by choosing a file, new diagram, and choosing the hierarchy diagram template to create that diagram. I'll show you how we go about doing it. We'll drag on some new or existing objects onto the diagram, and we'll connect them using the hierarchy connector. When you create a new diagram, you have the new objects palette on the left, which is where you can drag on new objects. You can also look at your existing objects and drag on things that are already in your model. The common shortcuts to use would be F4, F6, F8, F9 for zooming in, zooming out, centering on the screen, and zooming on a specific selection. F11 will help you redraw connectors, and F12 will allow you to insert the default connector that's on the palette. And one thing that's really helpful to note is when you drag an object onto the diagram, the cursor is actually the top left corner. So as soon as you drag something on, it gets anchored on the diagram at the top left corner. That's 0.00. Once you realize that, you'll have less moving of objects to do. And the fastest way to add a default connector is to use F12. So if you choose the source, then hit F12 on the keyboard and then click on the target or where the connector is going, it will draw the automatic connector for you. The diagram we're going to create first is the organization chart. And the organization chart is made up of organizations at the top first two rows and then of roles. So we'll go ahead and create that diagram and I'll show you how to add connectors. To create a new diagram, we simply choose the File, New menu, and the model is the EA Foundation sample model. This is a model that ships with the product, so we'll create our exercises in here. If your diagrams are not grouped by rule, you can go ahead and choose that. So if you check off group by diagram rule, hierarchy will be on its own. So right there you have template hierarchy. For the diagram name, we'll type in exercise organization chart. And I highly recommend copying and pasting that into the title tab because that will be used in your Irwin EA server piece powered by Evolve. So when I click on create, that will actually create a brand new diagram for me, and I'll show you how to create the first couple of bits, and then we'll show you what the whole thing looks like and also how to add lines. So the first thing I always do is I turn on my grid, and then I start dragging things onto the diagram. For instance, organization will be our first object. It's the corporation object. Remember the top left corner, so now the object will be drawn right here, and I drop it off in that top left corner. And it's called corporation. So if I use F6, that allows me to zoom in on that object. So now you can see there's my corporation organization. And then I have 6 more organizations to add at the next row. So I'll zoom out a tiny bit. And of course, I can always move things around, but I'll do it like this. So we have marketing. The next one is sales. And I'm leaving half a square in between. And then we have financial management, human resource management, information management, and training. Okay. Once you have these here, you can snap to the grid automatically, so you can actually see that when you move something, there's like a little jump. It does it. What it's doing is it's snapping to the grid. And I will now connect these corporation to the children below it. And as I mentioned before, F12 is the fastest way to do that. You can also drag the lines onto the palette, or even just click on this little, drag the little arrow and drop it off on top of marketing. So that's one way to do it. I like to do F12. So I click on corporation, hit F12 on my keyboard. You can see it changes my cursor into a target. And then I can keep hitting F12 and then the next target, F12, target, F12, next target. Now, you can tell that corporation is not centered between these two. The way to center it, if I were to just move corporation, it would move everything on that screen. So the way I can move it by itself is to hold down Control. And then I can move that by itself. And now I have it perfectly centered. And I can move on to the roles. The roles are below each organization. So I'll do a couple with you, and I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So the first one I'll add on is called webinars. It's right below marketing. So we'll add webinars right here. And then we'll add user groups. And printed media. So now that I've done 3, let me actually do a couple more, and I'll show you that first column, and then I'll pause the recording, and you'll see how it looks when it's done. Now, if you notice, if any of these roles, let's say they were kind of out of whack like that and not aligned with marketing, you can align them all. And the reason why it's important, I'll show you in just a moment. So let's connect these. Let's connect marketing to all of its children. So you can see right away that the line seems to be going through those objects if they're not left aligned with marketing. So the easiest way to rectify that is to highlight all of those children, go to Format, and then Align, Arrange, or Align. And so what we want to do is align to the left. Again, the cursor changes into a target, which means please click this on whatever you wish to align this with. So I want to align it with marketing, and there we go. So now those rows are all aligned with marketing. So now what I'll do is I'll finish the diagram and show you what it looks like in just a moment. So I've paused this diagram in the place where the objects are created, but not all the connectors are created, just to show you how quickly we can add all the extra lines. I will start from each one of the second row objects to connect all of the children. So for instance, sales will connect to all the ones below it. And you can see as soon as I do that, if something is not left aligned, and I'll fix that in just a moment. Clearly, I'm having that issue with all of them. And the last one is training. So to fix that, I simply choose those objects. Under Format, I go to Align Left, and then align with that. Do the same thing to here. Did not mean to do that. And the last one. And now you can see we have completed the exercise for the organization chart. When you add connectors, you can simply start from the top level object the way I showed you. You can drag the lines on or use F12, and this will be true in other places as well. The next diagram we'll create is a swim lane diagram, and you don't have to think of this as primarily for process flows, but any kind of diagram where you're nesting objects inside of another one would be considered a type of swim lane diagram or a diagram that looks like this. So the way we'll do it is by using process flow level 3. We'll call it exercise swim lane diagram, and we'll build it the way it's described on the next page using regular connectors. So the diagram will look like that, and once again, I will go directly into the modeler to do that. So right here, we'll create a new diagram using process flow level 3 template. So you can see right here is process flow level 3, and we'll call this one exercise swim lane diagram, just to keep it nice and simple. If you're working with an environment in a repository with other people, make sure you're adding your initials if you're all creating the same exact diagrams. Of course, in the real world, you wouldn't have the same diagram many times, but when you're doing training like this, you certainly could. To do this diagram, we'll start with an event. So in our case, the starting event is called order received. Again, remember the top left corner of all your objects will grab an external event and drag it on. So that will be order received. And once again, we can't quite see that, so I will hit F6 in order to zoom in on that object. And now I need 4 swim lanes. The swim lanes are sales, finance, warehouse, and transport. And the swim lanes happen to be the organization object. So I will drag those on. So let's start with sales. And sometimes it'll say that this object already exists, and do you wish to use that or not? And we do want to use it, so we'll hit yes, and that will allow us to reuse that object. Also notice that each object has a little center dot on it, which if I align it with a center dot of the event, it will align the objects for me, and I can, of course, make this a little bit more narrow and align it that way. So now we can, starting from sales, drag on the activity, which happens to be record order. And again, we can align it with the event. And from the event to the process, we want to simply drag a line on, a mandatory line. And if it looks like that, if the line seems to go behind the swim lane, simply move your swim lane to the back. So you can right-click on it, move to back, and then the connector will be in the right place. Now, after sales, we have a swim lane called finance. So we'll go ahead and add that. I like to add a little bit of space between and yes to reuse it. If you hit F4, that will center to the screen and you can see where you are. And let's just add all the swim lanes, then we can make them all the same size. So we'll do finance. Oops, not a process. Easy enough to rectify, but an organizational swim lane. And transport. And if any of them exist, you can hit yes to reuse them. Now I'd like to make the bottom three the same as the top one, so I'll simply highlight them. I can go into the format menu, set this to be the same size as the first one. You can see it does that. I can also left align them, and I can use my grid snap to bring them closer to each other without having to really worry about it too much. So once I have done that, I can hit F4. Let's go ahead and finish out this diagram. So we just need a few more processes. The next one is check credit. And then we have allocate stock, in warehouse, pick product, and transfer to shipping. We won't have enough room, so I'll make these a little bit longer. Actually, let me show you another way to do that. So another way to add space is to go into the insert spacing section, and I can allow shape resize, which will allow me to redraw to make the swim lanes longer. So I need horizontal space, so I'll choose that. And if I click and hold in here, that will automatically add space for me and make the swim lanes longer as well. So I need an output and from allocate stock. So that's going to go right here. That will allow me to connect information from check credit and from allocate stock. I'll show you how to redraw that connector. So this connector will simply go from the right, and then we'll add a connector from allocate stock, record order F12 to check credit. Again, sometimes they hide, so then we need to move the swim lane to the back. And record order also comes in to allocate stock. And better yet, let's just move all the swim lanes to the back so that doesn't happen again. And then we have two more activities from allocate stock. We have pick product and transfer to shipping. Okay. Again, we can insert some more horizontal space, just a tiny bit more. And connect this to that. Final swim lane, final process, is deliver order. I want to add a tiny bit more space. Sometimes you don't know how much space you'll need until you actually start to create the diagram, and this already exists. I'll hit yes to reuse it. So some of these exist, some of them don't. Mandatory connector. And now the result is order delivered. Order delivered has been delivered to the customer, so it's an external result. So we'll go ahead and end this with order delivered. And yes, let's go ahead and reuse it. Oops. That's an event, and we actually want this to be a result. Let's check that's internal. Okay. So what that means is we can actually cut this and we'll paste it on. And when it asks us how we want to do it, we want this to be a result. So order delivered will be a result. It's an internal result, not external, according to this model, which is fine, which actually means we can trigger the next flow of information with that. And the last thing I wanted to mention here is that you can enable autocomplete. Autocomplete will allow you to not have to guess if something already exists, but it will pre-populate the information for you. So if you turn on autocomplete, next time if you were to start typing in, for instance, order delivered, it will automatically show you all the things that have the word order in them. So you don't have to guess, you don't have to wonder, does this exist or not exist? And then you can choose the object just like that. That's it. To summarize, diagrams are created based on diagram templates, following diagram rules and incorporating predefined diagram palettes. When creating diagrams, use the function keys and other shortcuts to make it quick and easy to navigate around the screen. Use the top left corner to anchor the objects on your diagrams. And insert space for easy diagram edits, and turn on autocomplete to reuse existing objects quickly and easily. Thank you so much for your attention.